The Santa Claus. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel where we bring the most iconic action stories to life. Today we are diving into a true movie story, The Santa Claus. The Santa Claus is a 1994 American Christmas fantasy comedy film directed by John Pasquin and written by Leo Benvenuti and Steve Rudnick. The first installment in the Santa Claus franchise, it stars Tim Allen as Scott Calvin, a divorced marketing executive who accidentally causes Santa Claus to fall from his roof to his death on Christmas Eve, inadvertently agreeing to a contract that forces him to take up the mantle. The Santa Claus premiered at Hollywood on November 5, 1994, and was theatrically released in the United States on November 11. It grossed $190.3 million worldwide against a $22 million budget, and received positive reviews from critics, and it has since become a Christmastime staple among viewers. Its success led to two sequels, The Santa Claus 2, 2002, and The Santa Claus 3, The Escaped Claus, 2006, both of which were commercially successful despite the former's mixed and the latter's negative reception. The franchise continued with a follow-up series, The Santa Clauses, which premiered November 16, 2022 on Disney+. The film was originally going to be released under the Hollywood Pictures banner, but following positive test screenings among children, it was transferred to the Walt Disney Pictures banner. Scott Calvin, a 37-year-old marketing director for a toy company at Lakeside, Illinois and divorced father, prepares to spend Christmas Eve with his young son, 9-year-old Charlie. Scott wants Charlie to maintain his belief in Santa Claus, despite not believing himself. Scott's ex-wife Laura and her psychiatrist husband Dr. Neil Miller stopped believing in Santa at a young age and feel it is time for Charlie to do the same. Scott and Charlie are awakened that night by a noise on the roof. While investigating, Scott startles Santa Claus, who falls off the roof and dies. Santa's body vanishes, leaving behind his familiar suit and a business card instructing the reader to wear his suit should anything unfortunate happen to him, and the reindeer will respond accordingly. Scott and Charlie find Santa's sleigh and reindeer on the roof. At Charlie's request, Scott reluctantly dons the suit and delivers gifts before the reindeer take them to the North Pole. Scott learns that, by wearing the suit, he is subject to a legal technicality known as the Santa Claus, and has accepted all of the late Santa's duties and responsibilities. The head elf, Bernard, gives Scott 11 months to get his affairs in order before reporting back to the North Pole on Thanksgiving. Overwhelmed, Scott changes into the pajamas provided to him and falls asleep. The next morning, Scott awakes in his own bed and believes the previous events were a dream but realizes he is still wearing the pajamas given to him. Charlie is proud that his father is the new Santa Claus, and this arouses concern in Laura, Neil, and the school staff. Scott, not wanting to destroy Charlie's newfound enthusiasm, asks him to keep their North Pole trip a secret. Over the next year, Scott starts to take on Santa's appearance and habits. He gains weight and develops an increased fondness for sweets, particularly milk and cookies. He develops a white beard that instantly regrows after shaving, and his hair turns white no matter how much he dyes it. During a meeting with his company, Scott argues against a proposal to advertise a toy military tank by showing Santa riding it, insisting that he must use his sleigh. Scott also begins to recount naughty and nice children by name when he sees them. After Laura and Neil witness children wanting to sit on Scott's lap at Charlie's soccer game, they assume Scott is deliberately misleading Charlie and suspend Scott's visitation rights. On Thanksgiving, a distraught Scott goes to Laura and Neil's house to see Charlie one last time. Charlie, desperate to help Scott realize how important he is to the children of the world, shows him a magical snow globe, a gift from Bernard, convincing Scott that he really is Santa. When Laura and Neil allow Scott a minute to talk to Charlie alone, Bernard appears and transports father and son to the North Pole. Thinking Scott has kidnapped Charlie, Laura and Neil summons the police. Scott sets out to deliver gifts with Charlie in tow. Upon arriving at Laura and Neil's home, Scott is arrested inside the house while Charlie waits for him in the sleigh. The elves eventually break him out of jail. Scott returns Charlie to his house and insists he spend Christmas Eve with Laura and Neil. His heartfelt speech to Charlie about the importance of everyone in the family convinces Laura and Neil that he is Santa. Laura burns the court documents suspending Scott's visitation rights, and tells him he can visit anytime. According to Bernard, anytime Charlie shakes his snow globe, his father will appear. Before leaving, Scott gives Laura and Neil the two presents that they never got as children, which caused their disbelief in Santa. His takeoff from the roof proves his identity to the police and various witnesses outside the house. After Scott leaves, Charlie summons him back with the snow globe, and Laura agrees to let them go together in the sleigh to finish delivering the presents. Cast: Tim Allen as Scott Calvin/Santa Claus, Eric Lloyd as Charlie Calvin, Judge Reinhold as Dr. Neil Miller, Wendy Crewson as Laura Miller, David Krumholtz as Bernard the head elf, Peter Boyle as Mr. Whittle, Larry Brandenburg as Detective Nunzio, Kenny Vadas as the ELFS leader, Chris Benson as Fireman O'Hara, Mary Gross as Ms. Daniels, Paige Tamada as Judy the elf, Joyce Guy as Principal Compton, Jane Eastwood as Judy the waitress, Judith Scott as Susan Perry, Tabitha Lupian as Ballet Girl, Lachlan Murdoch as Fax Kid, John Pasquin as Santa No. 6, Steve Finovich as Dr. Pete Novos, Frank Welker as Reindeer, voice, Kerrigan Mahan as Reindeer, voice, Bob Dermer as Puppet Punch, Nina Keogh as Puppet Judy, Melissa King as Sarah, Steve Lasesco as the previous Santa Claus, uncredited. Production. The script was written on spec by Steve Rudnick and Leo Benvenuti. In November 1992, it was announced Hollywood Pictures had acquired the script as a potential starring vehicle for Tim Allen. The film was shot at Raleigh Studios in Hollywood, California, and on location in the Greater Toronto Area, with Oakville serving as the city of Lakeside, Illinois. The reindeer used in the film were all from the Toronto Zoo. The trains used in the North Pole scene and the start of the film were all made by LGB. Eric Lloyd had to wear fake teeth and part of his dialogue was rearranged after he knocked out his teeth in an accident on a day off. Bill Murray and Chevy Chase, 9, were offered the role of Scott Calvin, but both turned it down. Chase declined due to scheduling conflicts, and Murray did not want to do another holiday-themed movie after doing Scrooged. Tom Selleck, Robin Williams, Tom Hanks, and Mel Gibson were also considered for the role. Jeff Daniels, Stanley Tucci, Christopher McDonald, and Bradley Whitford were considered for the role of Neil Miller. Patricia Richardson, Allen's co-star on Home Improvement, Patricia Clarkson, Patricia Heaton, and Kate Burton were considered for the role of Laura Miller. The Santa Claus grossed $145.3 million in the United States and Canada, and $45 million in other territories, for a worldwide total of $190.3 million. The film grossed $19.3 million in its opening weekend, finishing second at the U.S. box office behind Interview with the Vampire, which opened with $36 million, 13, 14, In its second weekend it grossed $17.1 million, finishing third. Over the 3-day Thanksgiving frame it then made $20.4 million, peaked at number 115 in November 2020. With the COVID-19 pandemic limiting new releases, The Santa Claus was re-released into 1,581 theaters and grossed $711,000. Freeform and AMC have played the film on television during the holiday season with record ratings. On Rotten Tomatoes, the film holds an approval rating of 73% based on 59 reviews, with an average rating of May 9, 10. The website's critics' consensus reads, "The Santa Claus is utterly undemanding, but it's firmly rooted in the sort of good old-fashioned holiday spirit missing from too many modern Yuletide films." 19. On Metacritic, the film has a weighted average score of 57 out of 100, based on reviews from 13 critics, indicating mixed or average reviews. 20. Audiences surveyed by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade, A- on scale of A+ to F. At one point in the film, a brief exchange between Scott and Laura takes place in which Laura hands Scott a piece of paper with Neil's mother's phone number on it. Scott then says, 1-800, spank me. I know that number. In 1996, this line caused an incident in which a child from Steilacoom, Washington called the number, which turned out to be an actual, working sex line number, and incur a phone bill of $400, equivalent to $801.95 in 2024. 25. Beginning with the 1999 DVD release, the exchange was removed from all future United States home media releases of the film, though it remains in the earlier released VHS and Laserdisc releases, and most digital downloads. The line is also removed from the Disney Plus print. On television broadcasts, the number is changed to 1-800 £. Christmas is an annual festival commemorating the birth of Jesus Christ, observed primarily on December 25, as a religious and cultural celebration among billions of people around the world. A liturgical feast central to Christianity, Christmas preparation begins on the first Sunday of Advent and it is followed by Christmastide, which historically in the West lasts 12 days and culminates on Twelfth Night. Christmas Day is a public holiday in many countries, is observed religiously by a majority of Christians, as well as celebrated culturally by many non-Christians, and forms an integral part of the annual holiday season. The traditional Christmas narrative recounted in the New Testament, known as the Nativity of Jesus, says that Jesus was born in Bethlehem, in accordance with messianic prophecies. When Joseph and Mary arrived in the city, the inn had no room, and so they were offered a stable where the Christ child was soon born, with angels proclaiming this news to shepherds, who then spread the word. There are different hypotheses regarding the date of the birth of Jesus. In the early 4th century, the Church fixed the date as December 25, the date of the winter solstice in the Roman Empire. It is 9 months after Annunciation on March 25, also the Roman date of the spring equinox. Most Christians celebrate on December 25 in the Gregorian calendar, which has been adopted almost universally in the civil calendars used in countries throughout the world. However, part of the Eastern Christian churches celebrate Christmas on December 25 of the older Julian calendar, which currently corresponds to January 7 in the Gregorian calendar. For Christians, celebrating that God came into the world in the form of man to atone for the sins of humanity is more important than knowing Jesus Christ's exact birth date. The customs associated with Christmas in various countries have a mix of pre-Christian, Christian, and secular themes and origins. Popular holiday traditions include gift-giving, completing an Advent calendar or Advent wreath, Christmas music and caroling, watching Christmas films, viewing a nativity play, an exchange of Christmas cards, attending church services, a special meal, and displaying various Christmas decorations, including Christmas trees, Christmas lights, nativity scenes, poinsettias, garlands, wreaths, mistletoe, and holly. Additionally, several related and often interchangeable figures, known as Santa Claus, Father Christmas, Saint Nicholas, and Christkind, are associated with bringing gifts to children during the Christmas season and have their own body of traditions and lore. Because gift-giving and many other aspects of the Christmas festival involve heightened economic activity, Christmas has become a significant event and a key sales period for retailers and businesses. Over the past few centuries, Christmas has had a steadily growing economic effect in many regions of the world. Liturgical historians generally agree that this part of the text was written in Rome in AD 336-25. This is consistent with the assertion that the date was formally set by Pope Julius I, Bishop of Rome from 337 to 352-28, though Christmas did not appear on the lists of festivals given by the early Christian writers Irenaeus and Tertullian. 6. The early church fathers John Chrysostom, Augustine of Hippo, and Jerome attested to December 25 as the date of Christmas toward the end of the 4th century. 23. December 25 was the traditional date of the winter solstice in the Roman Empire. 29, where most Christians lived, and the Roman festival Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, birthday of Sol Invictus, had been held on this date since 274 AD. 30. In the East, the birth of Jesus was celebrated in connection with the Epiphany on January 6, 31, 32. This holiday was not primarily about Christ's birth, but rather his baptism. 33. Christmas was promoted in the East as part of the revival of Orthodox Christianity that followed the death of the pro-Arian Emperor Valens at the Battle of Adrianople in 378. The feast was introduced in Constantinople in 379, in Antioch by John Chrysostom towards the end of the 4th century. 32, probably in 388, and in Alexandria in the following century. 34. The Georgian Iadbury demonstrates that Christmas was celebrated in Jerusalem by the 6th century. 35. The Nativity, from a 14th century missal, a liturgical book containing texts and music necessary for the celebration of Mass throughout the year. In the early Middle Ages, Christmas Day was overshadowed by Epiphany, which in Western Christianity focused on the visit of the Magi. However, the medieval calendar was dominated by Christmas-related holidays. The 40 days before Christmas became the 40 Days of Saint Martin, which began on November 11th, the feast of Saint Martin of Tours, now known as Advent. 36. In Italy, former Saturnalian traditions were attached to Advent. 36. Around the 12th century, these traditions transferred again to the 12 days of Christmas, December 25th to January 5th, a time that appears in the liturgical calendars as Christmastide or 12 Holy Days. 36. In 567, the Council of Tours put in place the season of Christmastide, proclaiming the 12 days from Christmas to Epiphany as a sacred and festive season, and established the duty of Advent fasting in preparation for the feast. 37. This was done in order to solve the administrative problem for the Roman Empire as it tried to coordinate the solar Julian calendar with the lunar calendars of its provinces in the East. 38. The prominence of Christmas Day increased gradually after Charlemagne was crowned emperor on Christmas Day in 839, King Edmund the Martyr was anointed on Christmas in 855, and King William I of England was crowned on Christmas Day 1066. By the High Middle Ages, the holiday had become so prominent that chroniclers routinely noted where various magnates celebrated Christmas. King Richard II of England hosted a Christmas feast in 1377 at which 28 oxen and 300 sheep were eaten. 36. The Yule boar was a common feature of medieval Christmas feasts. Caroling also became popular, and was originally performed by a group of dancers who sang. The group was composed of a lead singer and a ring of dancers that provided the chorus. Writers of the time condemned caroling as lewd, indicating that the unruly traditions of Saturnalia and Yule may have continued in this form. 36. Misrule, drunkenness, promiscuity, gambling, was also an important aspect of the festival. In England, gifts were exchanged on New Year's Day, a custom at the royal court, and there was special Christmas ale. 36. Christmas during the Middle Ages was a public festival that incorporated ivy, holly, and other evergreens. 41. Christmas gift-giving during the Middle Ages was usually between people with legal relationships, such as tenant and landlord. 41. The annual indulgence in eating, dancing, singing, sporting, and card-playing escalated in England, and by the 17th century the Christmas season featured lavish dinners, elaborate masks, and pageants. In 1607, King James I insisted that a play be acted on Christmas night and that the court indulge in games. 42. It was during the Reformation in 17th century Europe that many Protestants changed the gift bringer to the Christ child or Christkindl, and the date of giving gifts changed from December 6th to Christmas Eve. 43. 17th and 18th centuries. Martin Luther played a role in the emergence of the Christmas tree and in the tradition of presents on Christmas Eve. 44, 45. Following the Protestant Reformation, many of the new denominations, including the Anglican Church and Lutheran Church, continued to celebrate Christmas. 46. In 1629, the Anglican poet John Milton penned On the Morning of Christ's Nativity, a poem that has since been read by many during Christmastide. 47. Donald Hines, a professor at California State University, Chico, states that Martin Luther inaugurated a period in which Germany would produce a unique culture of Christmas, much copied in North America. 48. Among the congregations of the Dutch Reformed Church, Christmas was celebrated as one of the principal evangelical feasts. 49. However, in 17th century England, some groups such as the Puritans strongly condemned the celebration of Christmas, considering it a Catholic invention and the trappings of popery, or the rags of the beast. 50. In contrast, the established Anglican Church pressed for a more elaborate observance of feasts, penitential seasons, and saints' days. The calendar reform became a major point of tension between the Anglican Party and the Puritan Party. 51. The Catholic Church also responded, promoting the festival in a more religiously oriented form. King Charles I of England directed his noblemen and gentry to return to their landed estates in midwinter to keep up their old-style Christmas generosity. 42. Following the parliamentarian victory over Charles I during the English Civil War, England's Puritan rulers banned Christmas in 1647. 50. 52. Oliver Cromwell even ordered his troops to confiscate any special meals made on Christmas Day. 53. Protests followed as pro-Christmas rioting broke out in several cities, and for weeks Canterbury was controlled by the rioters, who decorated doorways with holly and shouted royalist slogans. 50. Football, among the sports the Puritans banned on a Sunday, was also used as a rebellious force. When Puritans outlawed Christmas in England in December 1647, the crowd brought out footballs as a symbol of festive misrule. 54. The book, The Vindication of Christmas, London, 1652, argued against the Puritans, and makes note of Old English Christmas traditions, dinner, roast apples on the fire, card playing, dances with plowboys and maidservants, Old Father Christmas and carol singing. 55. During the ban, semi-clandestine religious services marking Christ's birth continued to be held, and people sang carols in secret. 56. The Examination and Trial of Old Father Christmas, 1686, published after Christmas was reinstated as a holy day in England. Christmas was restored as a legal holiday in England with the restoration of King Charles II in 1660 when Puritan legislation was declared void, with Christmas again freely celebrated in England. 56. Many Calvinist clergymen disapproved of Christmas celebrations. As such, in Scotland, the Presbyterian Church of Scotland discouraged the observance of Christmas, and though James VI commanded its celebration in 1618, attendance at church was scant. 57. The Parliament of Scotland officially abolished the observance of Christmas in 1640, claiming that the church had been purged of all superstitious observation of days. 58. Whereas in England, Wales, and Ireland Christmas Day is a common law holiday, having been a customary holiday since time immemorial, it was not until 1871 that it was designated a bank holiday in Scotland. 59. The Diary of James Woodford, from the latter half of the 18th century, details the observance of Christmas and celebrations associated with the season over a number of years. 60. As in England, Puritans in colonial America staunchly opposed the observation of Christmas. 61. The Pilgrims of New England pointedly spent their first December 25th in the New World working normally. 61. Puritans such as Cotton Mather condemned Christmas both because Scripture did not mention its observance and because Christmas celebrations of the day often involved boisterous behavior. 62. 63. Many non-Puritans in New England deplored the loss of the holidays enjoyed by the laboring classes in England. 64. Christmas observance was outlawed in Boston in 1659. 61. The ban on Christmas observance was revoked in 1681 by English Governor Edmund Andros, but it was not until the mid-19th century that celebrating Christmas became fashionable in the Boston region. 65. At the same time, Christian residents of Virginia and New York observed the holiday freely. Pennsylvania Dutch settlers, predominantly Moravian settlers of Bethlehem, Nazareth, and Littites in Pennsylvania and the Wachovia settlements in North Carolina, were enthusiastic celebrators of Christmas. The Moravians in Bethlehem had the first Christmas trees in America as well as the first nativity scenes. 66. Christmas fell out of favor in the United States after the American Revolution, when it was considered an English custom. 67. With the atheistic cult of reason in power during the era of revolutionary France, Christian Christmas religious services were banned and the Three Kings cake was renamed the Equality Cake under anti-clerical government policies. 68. 19th century. Ebenezer Scrooge and the Ghost of Christmas Present, from Charles Dickens's A Christmas Carol, 1843. In the early 19th century, Christmas festivities and services gradually spread with the rise of the Oxford movement in the Church of England that emphasized the centrality of Christmas in Christianity and charity to the poor. 69, along with Washington Irving, Charles Dickens, and other authors emphasizing family, children, kind-heartedness, gift-giving, and Santa Claus. For Irving, 69. For Father Christmas, for Dickens. 70, an indication this increased recognition of Christmas was slow, however, is seen in the fact that, in 20 of the years between 1790 and 1835, the Times did not mention Christmas at all. 71. In the early 19th century, writers imagined Tudor period Christmas as a time of heartfelt celebration. In 1835, Thomas Hervey and Robert Seymour published the Christmas book in which they introduced what has been called a national Christmas narrative. 72. In his book, Hervey asserted, "The revels of merry England are fast subsiding into silence, and her many customs wearing gradually away." 73. In 1843, Charles Dickens wrote the novel A Christmas Carol, which helped revive the spirit of Christmas and seasonal merriment. 74-75, its instant popularity played a major role in portraying Christmas as a holiday emphasizing family, goodwill, and compassion. 69. Dickens sought to construct Christmas as a family-centered festival of generosity, linking worship and feasting within a context of social reconciliation. 76. Superimposing his humanitarian vision of the holiday in what has been termed carol philosophy. 77. Dickens influenced many aspects of Christmas that are celebrated today in Western culture, such as family gatherings, seasonal food and drink, dancing, games, and a festive generosity of spirit. 78. It has been said that Dickens' breakthrough with A Christmas Carol was his ingenious pairing of seasonal fiction and seasonal book sales. 79. A prominent phrase from the tale, Merry Christmas, was popularized following the appearance of the story. 80. This coincided with the appearance of the Oxford movement and the growth of Anglo-Catholicism, which led a revival in traditional rituals and religious observances. 81. 19th-century lithograph showing the Christkindlesmarkt, Christmas market, in Nuremberg, Germany. The term Scrooge became a synonym for miser, with the phrase bah humbug becoming emblematic of a dismissive attitude of the festive spirit. 82. In 1843, the first commercial Christmas card was produced by Sir Henry Cole. 83. The revival of the Christmas Carol began with William Sandys's Christmas Carols Ancient and Modern, 1833, with the first appearance in print of The First Noel, I Saw Three Ships, Hark the Herald Angels Sing, and God Rest Ye Merry, Gentlemen, popularized in Dickens's A Christmas Carol. The Queen's Christmas Tree at Windsor Castle, published in the Illustrated London News, 1848. In Britain, the Christmas tree was introduced in the early 19th century by the German-born Queen Charlotte. In 1832, the future Queen Victoria wrote about her delight at having a Christmas tree hung with lights, ornaments, and presents placed round it. 84. After her marriage to her German cousin Prince Albert, by 1841 the custom became more widespread throughout Britain. 85. An image of the British royal family with their Christmas tree at Windsor Castle created a sensation when it was published in the Illustrated London News in 1848. A modified version of this image was published in Godey's Lady's Book, Philadelphia in 1850, 86, 87. By the 1870s, putting up a Christmas tree had become common in America. 86. In America, interest in Christmas had been revived in the 1820s by several short stories by Washington Irving which appear in his The Sketchbook of Geoffrey Crayon, Gent. and Bowl of Christmas. Irving's stories depicted harmonious, warm-hearted English Christmas festivities he experienced while staying in Astor Hall, Birmingham, England, that had largely been abandoned. 88. And he used the tract Vindication of Christmas, 1652, of Old English Christmas traditions, that he had transcribed into his journal as a format for his stories. 42. A Norwegian Christmas, 1846 painting by Adolf Tideman. In 1822, Clement Clarke Moore wrote the poem A Visit from St. Nicholas, popularly known by its first line, "'Twas the night before Christmas." 89. The poem helped popularize the tradition of exchanging gifts, and seasonal Christmas shopping began to assume economic importance. 90. This also started the cultural conflict between the holiday's spiritual significance and its associated commercialism that some see as corrupting the holiday. In her 1850 book The First Christmas in New England, Harriet Beecher Stowe includes a character who complains that the true meaning of Christmas was lost in a shopping spree. 91. While the celebration of Christmas was not yet customary in some regions in the U.S., Henry Wadsworth Longfellow detected a transition state about Christmas here in New England in 1856. The old Puritan feeling prevents it from being a cheerful, hearty holiday, though every year makes it more so. 92. In Reading, Pennsylvania, a newspaper remarked in 1861, "Even our Presbyterian friends who have hitherto steadfastly ignored Christmas, drew open their church doors and assembled in force to celebrate the anniversary of the Savior's birth." 92. The First Congregational Church of Rockford, Illinois, although of genuine Puritan stock, was preparing for a grand Christmas jubilee, a news correspondent reported in 1864. 92. By 1860, 14 states, including several from New England, had adopted Christmas as a legal holiday. 93. In 1875, Louis Prang introduced the Christmas card to Americans. He has been called the father of the American Christmas card. 94. On June 28, 1870, Christmas was formally declared a United States federal holiday. 95. During the First World War, and particularly in 1914-96, a series of informal truces took place for Christmas between opposing armies. The truces, which were organized spontaneously by fighting men, ranged from promises not to shoot, shouted at a distance in order to ease the pressure of war for the day, to friendly socializing, gift-giving, and even sport between enemies. 97. These incidents became a well-known and semi-mythologized part of popular memory. 98. They have been described as a symbol of common humanity even in the darkest of situations, and used to demonstrate to children the ideals of Christmas. 99. Under the state atheism of the Soviet Union, after its foundation in 1917, Christmas celebrations, along with other Christian holidays, were prohibited in public. 100. During the 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s, the League of Militant Atheists encouraged school pupils to campaign against Christmas traditions, such as the Christmas tree, as well as other Christian holidays, including Easter. The League established an anti-religious holiday to be the 31st of each month as a replacement. 101. At the height of this persecution, in 1929, on Christmas Day, children in Moscow were encouraged to spit on crucifixes as a protest against the holiday. 102. Instead, the importance of the holiday and all its trappings, such as the Christmas tree and gift-giving, was transferred to the new year. 103. It was not until the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 that the persecution ended and Orthodox Christmas became a state holiday again for the first time in Russia after 7 decades. Fantasy is a genre of speculative fiction that involves supernatural or magical elements, often including completely imaginary realms and creatures. The genre's roots lie in fantasy literature and drama. From the 20th century onward, it has expanded into various media, including film, television, graphic novels, manga, animation, and video games. The expression fantastic literature is often used for this genre by Anglophone literary critics. An archaic spelling for the term is fantasy. Fantasy is generally distinguished from the genres of science fiction and horror by an absence of scientific or macabre themes, although these can occur in fantasy. In popular culture, the fantasy genre predominantly features settings that reflect the actual Earth, but with some sense of otherness. Painting Skeleton Fantasy Show by Li Song, 1190–1264. Many works of fantasy use magic or other supernatural elements as a main plot element, theme, or setting. 9. Magic, magic practitioners, sorcerers, witches, and so on, and magical creatures are common in many of these worlds. An identifying trait of fantasy is the author's use of narrative elements that do not have to rely on history or nature to be coherent. 10. This differs from realistic fiction in that realistic fiction has to attend to the history and natural laws of reality, where fantasy does not. In writing fantasy, the author uses world building to create characters, situations, and settings that may not be possible in reality. Many fantasy authors use real-world folklore and mythology as inspiration, and although another defining characteristic of the fantasy genre is the inclusion of supernatural elements, such as magic, this does not have to be the case. Fantasy has often been compared to science fiction and horror because they are the major categories of speculative fiction. Fantasy is distinguished from science fiction by the plausibility of the narrative elements. A science fiction narrative is unlikely, though seemingly possible through logical scientific or technological extrapolation, where fantasy narratives do not need to be scientifically possible. 10. Authors have to rely on the reader's suspension of disbelief, an acceptance of the unbelievable or impossible for the sake of enjoyment, in order to write effective fantasies. Despite both genres' heavy reliance on the supernatural, fantasy and horror are distinguishable from one another. Horror primarily evokes fear through the protagonist's weaknesses or inability to deal with the antagonists. While elements of the supernatural and the fantastic were part of literature from its beginning, fantasy elements also occur throughout ancient religious texts such as the Epic of Gilgamesh. 14. The ancient Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish, in which the god Marduk slays the goddess Tiamat. 15. Reflects the theme of cosmic conflict between good and evil, which is characteristic of the modern fantasy genre. 15. Genres of romantic and fantasy literature also existed in ancient Egypt. 16. The Tales of the Court of King Khufu, which is preserved in the Westcar Papyrus and was probably written in the middle of the second half of the 18th century BC, preserves a mixture of stories with elements of historical fiction, fantasy, and satire. The Egyptian funerary texts preserve mythological tales. 16, the most significant of which are the myths of Osiris and his son Horus. Myth with fantastic elements intended for adults were a major genre of ancient Greek literature. 19. The comedies of Aristophanes are filled with fantastic elements. 20. Particularly his play The Birds. 20. In which an Athenian man persuades the world's birds to build a city in the clouds and thereby challenges Zeus's authority. 20. Ovid's Metamorphoses and Apuleius's The Golden Ass are both works that influenced the development of the fantasy genre. 20. By taking mythic elements and weaving them into personal accounts. 20. Both works involve complex narratives in which human beings are transformed into animals or inanimate objects. 20. Platonic teachings and early Christian theology are major influences on the modern fantasy genre. 20. Plato used allegories to convey many of his teachings. 20. And early Christian writers interpreted both the Old and New Testaments as employing parables to convey spiritual truths. 20. This ability to find meaning in a story that is not literally true became the foundation for developing the modern fantasy genre. Islamic, Hindu, and Chinese sources contain fantasy elements as well. The best-known fiction from the Islamic world is 1001 Nights, the Arabian Nights, which is a compilation of ancient and medieval folk tales. Various characters from this epic have become cultural icons in Western culture, such as Aladdin, Sinbad, and Ali Baba. 21. Hindu mythology was an evolution of the earlier Vedic mythology and had many more fantastical stories and characters, particularly in the Indian epics. The Panchatantra, fables of Bidpai, for example, used animal fables and magical tales to illustrate the central Indian principles of political science. Chinese traditions have been particularly influential in the vein of fantasy known as Xinghuazhi, which includes such writers as Ernest Brahma and Barry Hewitt. Beowulf is among the best known of the Old English tales in the English-speaking world, and it has deeply influenced the fantasy genre. Several fantasy works have retold the story, for example, John Gardner's novel Grendel, 22, Norse mythology, as found in the Elder Edda and Younger Edda collections, includes such figures as the god Odin and his fellow Aesir, in addition to dwarves, elves, dragons, and giants. 23. These elements have been directly imported into various fantasy works. The distinct folklores of Ireland, Wales, and Scotland have sometimes been used indiscriminately for Celtic fantasy, sometimes with great success. Other writers have specified the use of a single source. 24. The Welsh tradition has been particularly influential because of its connection to the legendary King Arthur and its collection into a single work, the epic Mabinogion. 24. There are many works where the boundary between fantasy and other genres is unclear. Did the writers believe in the possibility of the marvels in the play A Midsummer Night's Dream or the romance in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight? This question makes it difficult to distinguish when fantasy began, in its modern sense. Although predated by John Ruskin's story The King of the Golden River, 1841, the history of modern fantasy literature is usually said to begin with George MacDonald, the Scottish author of such novels as Fantastes, 1858, and The Princess and the Goblin, 1872. The former is widely considered to be the first fantasy novel ever written for adults. MacDonald was a major influence on both J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. 26. The other major fantasy author of this era was William Morris, an English poet who wrote several novels in the latter part of the century, including The Wood Beyond the World, 1894, and The Well at the World's End, 1896. Despite MacDonald's future influence with the novel At the Back of the North Wind, 1871, Morris's popularity with his contemporaries, and H.G. Wells's novel The Wonderful Visit, 1895, it was not until the 20th century that fantasy fiction began to reach a large audience. Lord Dunsany established the genre's popularity in both the novel and the short story forms. H. Rider Haggard, Rudyard Kipling, and Edgar Rice Burroughs began to write fantasy around this time. These authors, along with Abraham Merritt, established what was known as the Lost World subgenre. This was the most popular form of fantasy in the early decades of the 20th century, although several classic children's fantasies, such as Peter Pan and The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, were also published around this time. Juvenile fantasy was considered more acceptable than fantasy intended for adults, with the consequence that writers who wished to write fantasy for adults needed to fit their work into forms aimed at children. 27. Nathaniel Hawthorne wrote fantasy in a wonder book for girls and boys, intended for children. 28. Although his works for adults only verged on fantasy. For many years, this book and successes such as the novel Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, 1865, created a circular effect. All fantasy works, even the later series The Lord of the Rings, were therefore classified as children's literature. Citation needed. Political and social trends can affect a society's reception of fantasy. In the early 20th century, the new culture movement's enthusiasm for westernization and science in China compelled them to condemn the fantastical Sima genre of traditional Chinese literature. The spells and magical creatures in these novels were viewed as superstitious and backward, products of a feudal society hindering the modernization of China. Stories of the supernatural continued to be denounced once the communists rose to power, and mainland China experienced a revival in fantasy only after the Cultural Revolution had ended. 29. Fantasy became a genre of pulp magazines published in the West. The first all-fantasy fiction magazine, Weird Tales, was published in 1923. Many similar magazines eventually followed, including the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, FNSF. When this magazine was founded in 1949, the pulp format was at the height of its popularity. FNSF was instrumental in bringing fantasy fiction to a wide audience in both the US and the UK. Such magazines were also instrumental in the rise of science fiction, and the two genres were first associated with each other around this time. By 1950, sword and sorcery fiction had begun to find a wider audience, with the success of Robert E. Howard's Conan the Barbarian stories and Fritz Leiber's Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser stories. However, it was the advent of high fantasy, especially J.R.R. Tolkien's novels The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, which reached new heights of popularity in the late 1960s, that allowed fantasy to enter the mainstream. Several other series, such as C.S. Lewis's The Chronicles of Narnia and Ursula K. Le Guin's Earthsea, helped to cement the genre's popularity. The popularity of the fantasy genre has continued to increase in the 21st century, as evidenced by the best-selling status of several series: J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter, Robert Jordan's The Wheel of Time, George R.R. Martin's Song of Ice and Fire, Stephen Erickson's Malazan Book of the Fallen, Brandon Sanderson's The Stormlight Archive and Mistborn, and A. Sapkowski's The Witcher. Further information: fantasy art, fantasy film, fantasy television, and role-playing game. Several fantasy film adaptations have achieved blockbuster status, most notably the Lord of the Rings film trilogy directed by Peter Jackson, and the Harry Potter films, two of the highest-grossing film series in cinema history. A group playing a tabletop role-playing game, RPG. The game's master is at left using a cardboard screen to hide dice rolls from the players. Fantasy role-playing games, RPGs, span several media. Dungeons & Dragons, D&D, was the first tabletop role-playing game, and it remains the most successful and influential. According to a 1999 survey in the United States, 6% of 12 to 35-year-olds have played role-playing games. Of those who play regularly, 2/3 play D&D. 32 products branded Dungeons & Dragons accounted for over 50% of the RPG products sold in 2005. 33. The science fantasy role-playing game series Final Fantasy has been an icon of the role-playing video game genre. As of 2012, it was still among the top 10 best-selling video game franchises. The first collectible card game, Magic: The Gathering, has a fantasy theme and is similarly dominant in the industry. In immersive fantasy, the fictional world is seen as complete. Its fantastic elements remain unquestioned within the context of the story, and the reader perceives the world through the eyes and ears of characters native to the setting. This narrative mode consciously negates the sense of wonder often associated with science fiction, according to Mendelssohn. She adds that a sufficiently effective immersive fantasy may be indistinguishable from science fiction, as the fantastic acquires a scientific cohesion all of its own. This similarity has led to disputes about how to classify novels such as Mary Gentlesash, 2000, and China Miéville's Perdido Street Station, 2000. 41. Intrusion fantasy. In intrusion fantasy, the fantastic intrudes on reality, as portal fantasies do not, and the protagonist's engagement with that intrusion drives the story. Usually realist in style, these works assume the default world as their basis. Intrusion fantasies rely heavily on explanation and description. 42. Immersive and portal fantasies may themselves host intrusions. Classic intrusion fantasies include the novel Dracula, 1897, by Bram Stoker, and the book Mary Poppins, 1934, by P. L. Travers. 43. In French-speaking countries, this genre is called fantastique and is considered to be distinct from fantasy. Liminal fantasy. In liminal fantasy, the fantastic enters a world that appears to be our own. The marvelous is perceived as normal by the protagonists, while it disconcerts and estranges the reader. This is a relatively rare mode. Such fantasies often adopt an ironic, blasé tone, as opposed to the straight-faced mimesis more common in fantasy. 44. Examples include Joan Aiken's stories about the Armitage family, who are amazed that unicorns appear on their lawn on a Tuesday, rather than a Monday. 43. Subculture. Rosemary Jackson builds on and also challenges Todorov's definition of the fantastic in her book Fantasy, The Literature of Subversion, 1981. Jackson rejects the notion of the genre as a vessel for wish fulfillment that transcends human reality in worlds presented as superior to our own. Instead, she posits that the genre is inseparable from real life, particularly the social and cultural contexts in which each work of the genre is produced. She writes that the unreal elements of fantastic literature are created only in direct contrast to the boundaries set by its time periods, cultural order. These elements act to illuminate the unseen limitations of these boundaries, by undoing and recompiling the structures that define society into something strange and apparently new. In subverting these societal norms, Jackson claims, the fantastic represents an unspoken desire for greater societal change. Jackson criticizes Todorov's theory as being too limited in scope, examining only the literary function of the fantastic. She expands his structuralist theory to fit a more cultural study of the genre, which she proposes is not actually a genre, but a mode that draws upon literary elements of both realistic and supernatural fiction, to create an air of uncertainty in fantastic narratives as described by Todorov. Jackson also introduces the idea of reading the fantastic through a psychoanalytical lens, referring primarily to Freud's theory of the unconscious, which she believes is integral to understanding the fantastic's connection to the human psyche. 49. There are other ways to view the fantastic, and often these different perspectives come from different social climates. In their introduction to the female fantastic, Gender and the Supernatural in the 1890s and 1920s, Lizzie Harris McCormick, Jennifer Mitchell, and Rebecca Soares describe how the social climate in the 1890s and 1920s allowed for a new era of fantastic literature to develop. Women were exploring new freedoms and becoming more equal in society. Public fears about such women in society, together with women's expanded roles, allowed them to create a new style of fuzzy supernatural texts. The fantastic sits on the boundary between the supernatural and the mundane. This is analogous to how many women no longer respected a boundary of inequality that had been created for them. At the time, women's roles in society were uncertain. This is similar to how the roles of the fantastic genre are rarely straightforward. This climate allowed for a genre resembling the social structure to emerge, in which the fantastic is never purely supernatural, nor can the supernatural be entirely ruled out. Similarly, women were not fully equal yet, nor were they completely oppressed. The female fantastic seeks to reinforce the idea that nothing is certain in the fantastic genre nor in the gender roles of the 1920s. Many women began to blur the lines between genders, removing the binary aspect of gender and allowing for multiple interpretations. In a new way, women began to possess more masculine or queer qualities without encountering as much resistance. The fantastic genre reflects these new ideas by breaking analogous boundaries in the supernatural realm, so that readers never fully know whether the story is supernatural. The comedy film is a film genre that emphasizes humor. These films are designed to amuse audiences and make them laugh. 1. Films in this genre typically have a happy ending, with dark comedy being an exception to this rule. Comedy is one of the oldest genres in film, and it is derived from classical comedy in theater. Some of the earliest silent films were slapstick comedies, which often relied on visual depictions, such as sight gags and pratfalls, so they could be enjoyed without requiring sound. To provide drama and excitement to silent movies, live music was played in sync with the action on the screen, on pianos, organs, and other instruments. 2. When sound films became more prevalent during the 1920s, comedy films grew in popularity, as laughter could result from both burlesque situations but also from humorous dialogue. Comedy, compared with other film genres, places more focus on individual star actors, with many former stand-up comics transitioning to the film industry due to their popularity. 3. In the Screenwriter's Taxonomy, 2017, Eric A. Williams contends that film genres are fundamentally based upon a film's atmosphere, character, and story, and therefore, the labels drama and comedy are too broad to be considered a genre. 4. Instead, his taxonomy argues that comedy is a type of film that contains at least a dozen different subtypes. 5. A number of hybrid genres have emerged, such as action comedy and romantic comedy. In America, the sexual revolution drove an appetite for comedies that celebrated and parroted changing social morals, including Bob and Carol and Ted and Alice and Fanny Hill. 6. In Britain, a camp sensibility lay behind the successful Carry On films, while in America subversive independent filmmaker John Waters made camp films for college audiences with his drag queen friends that eventually found the mainstream audience. 7. The success of the American television show Saturday Night Live drove decades of cinema with racier content allowed on television, drawing on the program's stars and characters, with bigger successes including Wayne's World, Mean Girls, Ghostbusters, and Animal House. 6. Anarchic comedy, a random or stream of consciousness type of humor that often lampoons a form of authority. 8. The genre dates from the silent era. Notable examples are films produced by Monty Python. 9. Other examples include A Night at the Opera, 1935, and Dirty Work, 1998. Bathroom comedy, or gross-out comedy. Gross-out films are often aimed at the young adult market, 18 to 24, and rely heavily on vulgar, sexual, or toilet humor. They often contain a large amount of profanity and nudity. 10. Examples include Porky's, 1981, and There's Something About Mary, 1998. Black comedy, film deals with taboo subjects, including death, murder, crime, suicide, and war, in a satirical manner. 11. Examples include Do the Right Thing, 1989, and In Bruges, 2008. Comedy of ideas. This subtype uses comedy to explore serious ideas such as religion, sex, or politics. Often, the characters represent particular divergent worldviews and are forced to interact for comedic effect and social commentary. 12. Some examples include both Wag the Dog, 1997, and The Invention of Lying, 2009. Comedy of manners satirizes the mores and affectations of a social class. The plot is often concerned with an illicit love affair or other scandal. Generally, the plot is less important for its comedic effect than its witty dialogue. This form of comedy has a long ancestry that dates back at least as far as Much Ado About Nothing by William Shakespeare, published in 1623. 13. Examples include Breakfast at Tiffany's, 1961, and Under the Tuscan Sun, 2003. Farce. Farcical films exaggerate situations beyond the realm of possibility, thereby making them entertaining. 14. Examples include What's Up, Doc? 1972. Mockumentary. Comedies are fictional but use a doc style that includes interviews and documentary footage, along with regular scenes. Examples include This Is Spinal Tap, 1984, and None Still Here, 2010. Musical comedy, a film genre, has its roots in the 1920s, with Disney's Steamboat Willie, 1928, being the most popular of these early films. The subgenre resurged with popularity in the 1970s, with movies such as Bugsy Malone, 1976, and Grease, 1978, gaining status as cult classics. Observational comedy, films find humor in the common practices of everyday life. 15. Some film examples of observational humor include Purely Belter, 2000, and The Big Year, 2011. Parody, or spoof. A parody or spoof film satirizes other film genres or classic films. Such films employ sarcasm, stereotyping, mockery of scenes from other films, and the obviousness of meaning in a character's actions. 16. Examples of this form include Young Frankenstein, 1974, and Airplane, 1980. Sex comedy. The humor is primarily derived from sexual situations and desire. 17, as in Animal House, 1978, and How to Be a Latin Lover, 2017. Sitcom, where humor comes from knowing a stock group of characters, or character types, and then exposing them to different situations to create humorous and ironic juxtaposition. 18. Examples include After Hours, 1985, and Hot Top Time Machine, 2010. Straight comedy. This broad subtype applies to films that do not attempt a specific approach to comedy but, rather, use comedy for comedic sake. 19. Anger Management, 2003, and Bridesmaids, 2011, are examples of straight comedy films. Slapstick film involve exaggerated, boisterous physical action to create impossible and humorous situations. Because it relies predominantly on visual depictions of events, it does not require sound. Accordingly, the subgenre was ideal for silent movies and was prevalent during that era. 1. Stars of slapstick include Harold Lloyd, Roscoe Arbuckle, Charlie Chaplin, Peter Sellers, and Norman Wisdom. Some of these stars, as well as acts such as Lowell and Hardy and the Three Stooges, also found success incorporating slapstick comedy into sound films. Modern examples of slapstick comedy include Mouse Hunt, 1997, and Nacho Libre, 2006. Surreal humor, although not specifically linked to the history of surrealism, surreal comedies include behavior and storytelling techniques that are illogical, including bizarre juxtapositions, absurd situations, and unpredictable reactions to normal situations. 19. Some examples are Brazil, 1985, and Barton Fink, 1991. Hybrid subgenres. According to Williams' taxonomy, all film descriptions should contain their type, comedy or drama, combined with one or more subgenres. 5. This combination does not create a separate genre, but rather provides a better understanding of the film. Action comedy. Films of this type blend comic antics and action where the stars combine one-liners with a thrilling plot and daring stunts. The genre became a specific draw in North America in the 1980s when comedians such as Eddie Murphy started taking more action-oriented roles, such as in 48 Hours, 1982, and Beverly Hills Cop, 1984. Subgenres of the action comedy, labeled macrogenres by Williams, include Frowny Face 5. Martial arts films. Slapstick martial arts films became a mainstay of Hong Kong action cinema through the work of Jackie Chan among others, such as Who Am I? 1998, Kung Fu Panda is an action comedy that focuses on the martial art of Kung Fu. Superhero films. Some action films focus on superheroes, for example, The Incredibles, Hancock, Kick-Ass, and Deadpool. Buddy films. Films starring mismatched partners for comedic effects, such as in Midnight Run, Rush Hour, 21 Jump Street, Bad Boys, Starsky and Hutch, Tango and Cash, Lethal Weapon, and Stakeout. Comedy thriller. Comedy thriller is a type that combines elements of humor and suspense. Films such as Silver Streak, Charade, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, American Psycho, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, Grosse Point Blank, The Thin Man, The Big Fix, and The Lady Vanishes. Comedy mystery. Comedy mystery is a film genre combining elements of comedy and mystery fiction. Though the genre arguably peaked in the 1930s and 1940s, comedy mystery films have been continually produced since. 20 examples include the Pink Panther series, 21 Scooby-Doo films, Clue, 1985, and Knives Out, 2019. See also List of comedy mystery films. Crime comedy, a hybrid mix of crime and comedy films. Examples include Inspector Palmer's Mistake, 1960, Oh Brother Where Art Thou? 2000, Take the Money and Run, 1969, and Who Framed Roger Rabbit, 1988. Fantasy comedy. Fantasy comedy films use magic, supernatural, or mythological figures for comedic purposes. Some fantasy comedy includes an element of parody or satire, turning fantasy conventions on their head, such as the hero becoming a cowardly fool or the princess being a klutz. Examples of these films include Big, being John Malkovich, Ted, Hook, Night at the Museum, Groundhog Day, Click, and 1,000 Words. Comedy horror. Comedy horror is a genre/type in which the usual dark themes and scare tactics attributed to horror films are treated with a humorous approach. These films either often goofy horror cliches, such as in Scream, The Rocky Horror Picture Show, Little Shop of Horrors, Dracula, Dead and Loving It, and Scary Movie where campy styles are favored. Some are much more subtle and do not parody horror, such as An American Werewolf in London. Another style of comedy horror can also rely on over-the-top violence and gore, such as in The Evil Dead, 1981, The Return of the Living Dead, 1985, Brain Dead, 1992, and Doghouse, 2009. Such films are sometimes known as splatstick, a portmanteau of the words splatter and slapstick. It would be reasonable to put Ghostbusters in this category. Day-in-the-life comedy. Day-in-the-life films take small events in a person's life and raise their level of importance. The small things in life feel as important to the protagonist and the audience as the climactic battle in an action film or the final shootout in a western. 5. Often, the protagonists deal with multiple, overlapping issues in the course of the film. 5. The day-in-the-life comedy often finds humor in commenting upon the absurdity or irony of daily life. For example, The Terminal, 2004, or Waitress, 2007. Character humor is also used extensively in day-in-the-life comedies, as can be seen in American Splendor, 2003. Romantic comedy. Romantic comedies are humorous films with central themes that reinforce societal beliefs about love, e.g., themes such as love at first sight, love conquers all, or there is someone out there for everyone. The story typically revolves around characters falling into, and out of, and back into, love. 22. Homily, 2001, Annie Hall, 1977, Charade, 1963, City Lights, 1931, Four Weddings and a Funeral, 1994, Ick, 1927, The Lobster, 2015, My Wife, the Director General. 1966, My Favorite Wife, 1940, Pretty Woman, 1990, Some Like It Hot, 1959, Something's Gotta Give, 2003, and When Harry Met Sally, 1989, are examples of romantic comedies. Screwball comedy, a subgenre of the romantic comedy, screwball comedies appears to focus on the story of a central male character until a strong female character takes center stage. At this point, the man's story becomes secondary to a new issue typically introduced by the woman. This story grows in significance and, as it does, the man's masculinity is challenged by the sharp-witted woman, who is often his love interest. 5. Typically it can include a romantic element, an interplay between people of different economic strata, quick and witty repartee, some form of role reversal, and a happy ending. Some examples of screwball comedy during its heyday include It Happened One Night, 1934, Bringing Up Baby, 1938, The Philadelphia Story, 1940, His Girl Friday, 1940, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, 1941. More recent examples include Continental Divide, 1981, Rat Race, 2001, and Our Idiot Brother, 2011. Science fiction comedy. Science fiction comedy films often exaggerate the elements of traditional science fiction films to comic effect. Examples include Spaceballs, Coneheads, Galaxy Quest, Mars Attacks, Men in Black, and many more. Sports comedy. Sports comedy combines the genre of comedy with that of the sports film genre. Thematically, the story is often one of our team versus their team. Their team will always try to win, and our team will show the world that they deserve recognition or redemption. The story does not always have to involve a team, for the story could also be about an individual athlete, or the story could focus on an individual playing on a team. The comedic aspect of this supergenre often comes from physical humor, Basketball, 1998, character humor, Space Jam, 1996, or the juxtaposition of bad athletes succeeding against the odds. Drawing heavily from the theories of literary genre criticism, film genres are usually delineated by conventions, iconography, settings, narratives, characters, and actors. 3. One can also classify films by the tone, theme/topic, mood, format, target audience, or budget. 4. These characteristics are most evident in genre films, which are commercial feature films that, through repetition and variation, tell familiar stories with familiar characters and familiar situations in a given genre. 5. A film's genre will influence the use of filmmaking styles and techniques, such as the use of flashbacks and low-key lighting in film noir, tight framing in horror films, or fonts that look like rough-hewn logs for the titles of Western films. 6. In addition, genres have associated film scoring conventions, such as lush string orchestras for romantic melodramas or electronic music for science fiction films. 6. Genre also affects how films are broadcast on television, advertised, and organized. In video rental stores. 5. Alan Williams distinguishes three main genre categories: narrative, avant-garde, and documentary. 7. With the proliferation of particular genres, film subgenres can also emerge. The legal drama, for example, is a subgenre of drama that includes courtroom and trial-focused films. Subgenres are often a mixture of two separate genres. Genres can also merge with seemingly unrelated ones to form hybrid genres, where popular combinations include the romantic comedy and the action comedy film. Broader examples include the docufiction and docudrama, which merge the basic categories of fiction and nonfiction, documentary, doc-bait. Genres are not fixed, they change and evolve over time, and some genres may largely disappear. For example, the melodrama, doc-for, not only does genre refer to a type of film or its category, a key role is also played by the expectations of an audience about a film, as well as institutional discourses that create generic structures. 4. Overview. Characteristics. Characteristics of particular genres are most evident in genre films, which are commercial feature films that, through repetition and variation, tell familiar stories with familiar characters and familiar situations in a given genre. 5. Drawing heavily from the theories of literary genre criticism, film genres are usually delineated by conventions, iconography, narratives, formats, characters, and actors, all of which can vary according to the genre. 3. In terms of standard or stock characters, those in film noir, for example, include the femme fatale, 9, and the hard-boiled detective, while those in westerns, stock characters include the schoolmarm and the gunslinger. Regarding actors, some may acquire a reputation linked to a single genre, such as John Wayne, the western, or Fred Astaire, the musical. 10. Some genres have been characterized or known to use particular formats, which refers to the way in which films are shot, e.g., 35 mm, 16 mm, or 8 mm, or the manner of presentation, e.g., anamorphic widescreen. 4. Genres can also be classified by more inherent characteristics, usually implied in their names, such as settings, theme/topic, mood, target audience, or budget/type of production. 4. The setting is the environment, including both time and geographic location, in which the story and action take place, e.g., present day or historical period, Earth or outer space, urban or rural, etc. Genres that are particularly concerned with this element include the historical drama, war film, western, and space opera, the names of which all denote particular settings. 4. The theme or topic refers to the issues or concepts that the film revolves around, for example, the science fiction film, sports film, and crime film. The mood is the emotional tone of the film, as implied in the names of the comedy film, horror film, or tearjerker. Genres informed by particular target audiences include children's film, teen film, women's film, and chick flick. Genres characterized by the type of production include the blockbuster, independent film, and low-budget film, such as the B-movie, commercial, or amateur film, non-commercial. Screenwriters, in particular, often organize their stories by genre, focusing their attention on 3 specific aspects: atmosphere, character, and story. 11. A film's atmosphere includes costumes, props, locations, and the visceral experiences created for the audience. 12. Aspects of character include archetypes, stock characters, and the goals and motivations of the central characters. 13. Some story considerations for screenwriters, as they relate to genre, include theme, tentpole scenes, and how the rhythm of characters' perspective shift from scene to scene. From the earliest days of cinema in the 19th century, the term genre, already in use in English with reference to works of art or literary production from at least 1770, 26, was used, by whom? To organize films according to type. 27. By the 1950s, André Bazin was discussing the concept of genre by using the Western film as an example. During this era, there was a debate over auteur theory versus genre. 4. In the late 1960s, the concept of genre became a significant part of film theory. 4. Theatrical release poster of the 1931 American film Little Caesar. Film genres draw on genres from other forms. Western novels existed before the Western film, and musical theater predated film musicals. 28. The perceived genre of a film can change over time. For example, in the 21st century, The Great Train Robbery, 1903, classes as a key early Western film, but when released, marketing promoted it for its relation to the then popular genres of the chase film, the railroad film, and the crime film. 29. The key reason that the early Hollywood industrial system from the 1920s to the 1950s. Favorite genre films is that in Hollywood's industrial mode of production, genre movies are dependable products to market to audiences. They were easy to produce, and it was easy for audiences to understand the genre film. 30. In the 1920s to 1950s, genre films had clear conventions and iconography, such as the heavy coats worn by gangsters in films like Little Caesar, 1931. 31. The conventions in genre films enable filmmakers to generate them in an industrial assembly line fashion, an approach which can be seen in the James Bond spy films, which all use a formula of lots of action, fancy gadgets, beautiful women, and colorful villains, even though the actors, directors, and screenwriters change. 31. Pure and hybrid genres. Films are rarely purely from one genre, which is in keeping with the cinema's diverse and derivative origins, it being a blend of vaudeville, music hall, theater, photography, and novels. 4. American film historian Janet Steiger states that the genre of a film can be defined in 4 ways. The idealist method judges films by predetermined standards. The empirical method identifies the genre of a film by comparing it to a list of films already deemed to fall within a certain genre. The a priori method uses common generic elements which are identified in advance. The social conventions method of identifying the genre of a film is based on the accepted cultural consensus within society. 32. Martin Loop contends that Hollywood films are not pure genres because most Hollywood movies blend the love-oriented plot of the romance genre with other genres. 32. Jim Collins claims that since the 1980s, Hollywood films have been influenced by the trend towards ironic hybridization, in which directors combine elements from different genres, as with the Western / science fiction mix in Back to the Future Part 3, 32. Many films cross into multiple genres. Susan Hayward states that spy films often cross genre boundaries with thriller films. 4. Some genre films take genre elements from one genre and place them into the conventions of a second genre, such as with The Bandwagon, 1953, which adds film noir and detective film elements into The Girl Hunt Ballet, 31. In the 1970s New Hollywood era, there was so much parodying of genres that it can be hard to assign genres to some films from this era, such as Mel Brooks' comedy western Blazing Saddles, 1974, or The Private Eye parody The Long Goodbye, 1973. 4. Other films from this era bend genres so much that it is challenging to put them in a genre category, such as Roman Polanski's Chinatown, 1974. and William Friedkin's The French Connection, 1971. 4. Film theorist Robert Stam challenged whether genres really exist, or whether they are merely made up by critics. Stam has questioned whether genres are really out there in the world, or are they really the construction of analysts? As well, he has asked whether there is a finite taxonomy of genres, or are they in principle infinite, and whether genres are timeless essences, ephemeral, time-bound entities. Are genres culture-bound or transcultural? Stam has also asked whether genre analysis should aim at being descriptive or prescriptive. While some genres are based on story content, the war film, how they are borrowed from literature, comedy, melodrama, or from other media, the musical. Some are performer-based, Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers films, or budget-based, blockbusters, low-budget film, while others are based on artistic status, the art film, racial identity, race films, location, the Western, or sexual orientation, new queer cinema. 33. Audience expectations. Many genres have built-in audiences and corresponding publications that support them, such as magazines and websites. For example, Horror films have a well-established fan base that reads horror magazines such as Fangoria. Films that are difficult to categorize into a genre are often less successful. As such, film genres are also useful in the areas of marketing, film criticism, and the analysis of consumption. Hollywood story consultant John Truby states that, "You have to know how to transcend the forms, genres, so you can give the audience a sense of originality and surprise." 34. Some screenwriters use genre as a means of determining what kind of plot or content to put into a screenplay. They may study films of specific genres to find examples. This is a way that some screenwriters are able to copy elements of successful movies and pass them off in a new screenplay. It is likely that such screenplays fall short in originality. As Truby says, writers know enough to write a genre script, but they haven't twisted the story beats of that genre in such a way that it gives an original face to it. 35. Cinema technologies are associated with genres. Huge widescreens helped Western films to create an expansive setting of the open plains and desert. Science fiction and fantasy films are associated with special effects, notably computer-generated imagery, e.g., the Harry Potter films. 4. In 2017, screenwriter Eric A. Williams published a system for screenwriters to conceptualize narrative film genres based on audience expectations. 36. The system was based upon the structure biologists use to analyze living beings. Williams wrote a companion book detailing his taxonomy, which claims to be able to identify all feature-length narrative films with 7 categorizations: film type, supergenre, macrogenre, microgenre, voice, and pathway. 37. Categorization. War film or anti-war movie, Lewis Milestone's All Quiet on the Western Front, 1930. Because genres are easier to recognize than to define, academics agree they cannot be identified in a rigid way. 38. Furthermore, different countries and cultures define genres in different ways. A typical example are war movies. In the United States, they are mostly related to ones with large U.S. involvement such as World Wars and Vietnam, whereas in other countries, movies related to wars in other historical periods are considered war movies. Film genres may appear to be readily categorizable from the setting of the film. Nevertheless, films with the same settings can be very different, due to the use of different themes or moods. For example, while both the Battle of Midway and All Quiet on the Western Front are set in a wartime context and might be classified as belonging to the war film genre, the first examines the themes of honor, sacrifice, and valor, and the second is an anti-war film which emphasizes the pain and horror of war. While there is an argument that film noir movies could be deemed to be set in an urban setting, in cheap hotels and underworld bars, many classic noirs take place mainly in small towns, suburbia, rural areas, or on the open road. 39. The editors of filmzeich.org argue that animation, pornographic film, documentary film, silent film, and so on are non-genre-based film categories. 40. Linda Williams argues that horror, melodrama, and pornography all fall into the category of body genres, since they are each designed to elicit physical reactions on the part of viewers. Horror is designed to elicit spine-chilling, white-knuckled, eye-bulging terror. Melodramas are designed to make viewers cry after seeing the misfortunes of the on-screen characters, and pornography is designed to elicit sexual arousal. 41. This approach can be extended. Comedies make people laugh, tearjerkers make people cry, feel-good films lift people's spirits, and inspiration films provide hope for viewers. Erica Williams, no relation to Linda Williams, argues that all narrative feature-length films can be categorized as one of 11 supergenres: action, crime, fantasy, horror, romance, science fiction, slice of life, sports, thriller, war, and western. 11. Williams contends that labels such as comedy or drama are more broad than the category of supergenre, and therefore fall into a category he calls film type. 36. Similarly, Williams explains that labels such as animation and musical are more specific to storytelling technique and therefore fall into his category of voice. 42. For example, according to Williams, a film like Blazing Saddles could be categorized as a comedy type, western, supergenre, musical, voice, while Anomalisa is a drama type, slice of life, supergenre, animation, voice. Williams has created a 7-tiered categorization for narrative feature films called the Screenwriter's Taxonomy. 37. A genre movie is a film that follows some or all of the conventions of a particular genre, whether or not it was intentional when the movie was produced. 43. Film in the context of history. In order to understand the creation and context of each film genre, we must look at its popularity in the context of its place in history. For example, the 1970s blaxploitation films have been called an attempt to undermine the rise of Afro-Americans' Black consciousness movement of that era. For, in William Park's analysis of film noir, he states that we must view and interpret film for its message with the context of history within our minds. He states that this is how film can truly be understood by its audience. 44. Film genres such as film noir and Western film reflect values of the time period. While film noir combines German expressionist filming strategies with post-World War II ideals, Western films focused on the ideal of the early 20th century. Films such as the musical were created as a form of entertainment during the Great Depression, allowing its viewers an escape during tough times. So when watching and analyzing film genres, we must remember its true intentions aside from its entertainment value. Over time, a genre can change through stages: the classic genre era, the parody of the classics, the period where filmmakers deny that their films are part of a certain genre, and finally a critique of the entire genre. 4. This pattern can be seen with the Western film. In the earliest, classic Westerns, there was a clear hero who protected society from lawless villains who lived in the wilderness and came into civilization to commit crimes. 4. However, in revisionist Westerns of the 1970s, the protagonist becomes an anti-hero who lives in the wilderness to get away from a civilization that is depicted as corrupt, with the villains now integrated into society. Another example of a genre changing over time is the popularity of the neo-noir films in the early 2000s, Mulholland Drive, 2001, The Man Who Wasn't There, 2001, and Far From Heaven, 2002. Are these film noir parodies, a repetition of noir genre tropes, or a re-examination of the noir genre? 4. This is also important to remember when looking at films in the future. As viewers watch a film, they are conscious of societal influence with the film itself. In order to understand its true intentions, we must identify its intended audience and what narrative of our current society, as well as it comments to the past in relation with today's society. This enables viewers to understand the evolution of film genres as time and history morphs or views and ideals of the entertainment industry. People of all ages and cultures respond to humor. Most people are able to experience humor, be amused, smile or laugh at something funny, such as a pun or joke, and thus are considered to have a sense of humor. The hypothetical person lacking a sense of humor would likely find the behavior to be inexplicable, strange, or even irrational. Though ultimately decided by subjective personal taste, the extent to which a person finds something humorous depends on a host of variables, including geographical location, culture, maturity, level of education, intelligence, and context. For example, young children may favor slapstick such as Punch and Judy puppet shows or cartoons such as Tom and Jerry or Looney Tunes, whose physical nature makes it accessible to them. By contrast, more sophisticated forms of humor such as satire require an understanding of its social meaning and context, and thus tend to appeal to a more mature audience. Theories. Main article: Theories of Humor. Many theories exist about what humor is and what social function it serves. The prevailing types of theories attempting to account for the existence of humor include psychological theories, the vast majority of which consider humor-induced behavior to be very healthy, spiritual theories, which may, for instance, consider humor to be a gift from God, and theories which consider humor to be an unexplainable mystery, very much like a mystical experience. 1. The benign violation theory, endorsed by Peter McGraw. 2. Attempts to explain humor's existence. The theory says humor only occurs when something seems wrong, unsettling, or threatening, but simultaneously seems okay, acceptable, or safe. 3. Humor can be used as a method to easily engage in social interaction by taking away that awkward, uncomfortable, or uneasy feeling of social interactions. Others believe that the appropriate use of humor can facilitate social interactions. 4. 5. Views. Some claim that humor should not be explained. Author E. B. White once said, "Humor can be dissected as a frog can, but the thing dies in the process and the innards are discouraging to any but the pure scientific mind." 6. Counter to this argument, protests against offensive cartoons invite the dissection of humor or its lack by aggrieved individuals and communities. This process of dissecting humor does not necessarily banish a sense of humor but directs attention towards its politics and assumed universality. 7. Arthur Schopenhauer lamented the misuse of humor, a German loanword from English, to mean any type of comedy. However, both humor and comic are often used when theorizing about the subject. The connotations of humor as opposed to comic are said to be that of response versus stimulus. Additionally, humor was thought to include a combination of ridiculousness and wit in an individual, the paradigmatic case being Shakespeare's Sir John Falstaff. The French were slow to adopt the term humor. In French, humor and humor are still two different words, the former referring to a person's mood or to the archaic concept of the four humors. Citation needed. Non-satirical humor can be specifically termed droll humor or recreational drollery. 8, 9. Humor is also observed in great apes. 10. Sociological factors. As with any art form, the acceptance of a particular style or incidence of humor depends on sociological factors and varies from person to person. Throughout history, comedy has been used as a form of entertainment all over the world, whether in the courts of the Western kings or the villages of the Far East. Both a social etiquette and a certain intelligence can be displayed through forms of wit and sarcasm. 18th-century German author George Lichtenberg said that, "The more you know humor, the more you become demanding in fineness." 11. Ancient Greece. Western humor theory begins with Plato, who attributed to Socrates, as a semi-historical dialogue character, in the Philebus, p. 49b, the view that the essence of the ridiculous is an ignorance in the weak, who are thus unable to retaliate when ridiculed. Later, in Greek philosophy, Aristotle